Morning, folks. Welcome to Half and Half this morning. We are back together. Last week I was on my own, but Scott and I are both here today. Little bit of snow in Blue Mounds. Took a long time to get there. It's already December, and this is our first time to see snow, I think. Maybe like once before. So that's nice. It's cozy in here. Last week, I taught a very earnest and serious class, and then afterwards I went back and looked at the video, and there was a kitten who basically upstaged me the entire class. So, I just thought that was really funny. Somebody told me to go watch the kitten on the video, and she was all over the place last week. I don't know if any of you actually paid attention to me or paid attention to her, but I feel like that's karma. I feel like as a 3-year-old, I may have upstaged a few people with just, I don't know, playing around because things are just so interesting when you're young, aren't they? Um, and maybe they're interesting when you're older too. So we're going to do some interesting things with the body, I think. We've been working on from the ground up. We've done some work with the feet and ankles, some work with the shins, looking at the hamstring muscles, and also the hip flexor muscles last week. So we're working our way up that line of muscles. But mostly what we've done is front and back movement. We've done hip flexion and hip extension, or the foot maybe more in flexion and extension, and thinking about that front to back movement. Now that's useful because that's your walking movement. It's the way your joint moves when you sit. You do those. Okay, that was not the kitten, but 2 bites just fell over. So maybe we have a ghost. Hopefully you didn't hear that, but that was my reaction there. Anyway, as far as the hip is concerned, um, this action of going front to back, that's a really useful action to pay attention to because we do it so often. Additionally, what balances out all that front to back movement in the leg and the hip is to work some of the other ranges of motion. So we're going to look at the side to side movement in the leg and the foot and the hip today. And so that movement of side to side in anatomy is talked about as lateral, sort of a lateral direction or a medial direction. If I'm coming in towards the midline, it's a medial direction. If I'm going out to the side more, it's a lateral direction. And so muscularly, sometimes we talk about the lateral line from the outside of the foot, outside of the shin, outside of the thigh, up into the muscles in the hip. And those muscles are going to do an action called abduction and adduction. I wrote it in the chat. I don't know why anatomy won't just rename those because it's very confusing because they sound exactly alike. But one is AB, abduction, away from the midline, and one is AD, add, like mathematically adding your leg back to center, adduction. So we'll play with some of those movements in the hip. We'll also look a little bit at inversion and eversion of the foot and ankle. We did that a few weeks back, looking at that movement. That is connected to the same sort of side to side movement. And there's some different ways we can work with that. All right, so we're going to start lying on your back. And before you lie down on your back, maybe you already did, so you can do a nice, great sit up to come up to sitting. Set up your feet so your toes are really pointing forward. And then maybe just take a look at this first thing I'm going to ask you to do. So my knees, my shins, my ankles, my feet are all in line. And then like we've done in the chair, sitting on the chair before, we're going to work with just the foot and ankle movement a couple times, feeling how you can roll to the outside of your foot and into center, and then how you can roll to the inside of your foot and then to center. And we want to get it just in the foot and the ankle. Now I have a pretty big movement. Maybe you can see that. Your movement doesn't necessarily have to be that big. It's not necessarily desirable. It's just how my feet are. Just know that's the direction that I'm going in and out that way. And then what I want to pay attention to, that it's not my whole leg. Because if it's my whole leg, it's not a foot and ankle movement, it's a hip movement. We're going to get to that later. We're going to try to keep the knees and the legs right in place and take that movement back and forth. Now, I know you want to try it. Maybe you already started trying it. I want to show you one more thing, which is to do the opposite, to keep the feet in place And then ask the knees to move. And how far can your knees and your shins and your ankles move without changing the feet at all, right? So typically our knees go to the side, our feet come up. That's a really normal movement. We're going to play with how much can the knees move, or maybe how little can the knees move without rolling the foot at all. And then back to center, and then knees move without rolling the foot at all, and then back to center. So it's the same action in the ankle. We've just changed which part of the body is moving, right? So we're going to feel ankle, shin, and foot things going on in that second one. So now lie on your back. Here we go. You have your picture in your mind. So feet are pointing straight ahead, toes are pointing straight ahead, knees are in line. Maybe you put your hands on your thighs if you want to feel that they're not moving. And then let's start one foot at a time, rolling to the outside of your left foot, either foot, whichever one you want to start with, and then back to center, and then rolling to the inside of that foot, and attempting to keep your knee totally still. Might move a little, but your goal is to keep it still. Just feel that movement towards the big toe side and then towards the pinky toe side. And if it's working pretty well, you get a little more skilled at it, you can feel muscles around the sole of your foot, around your ankle, outside of your ankle, kind of up into the shin, outside of the shin, lateral line. Maybe through the back, kind of deep underneath the calf. So you can feel all sorts of things there. Now I'm going to leave that foot alone. Let's do the other foot. Notice how it feels. Sometimes in order to move the foot, you start gripping up in your inner thighs or your hips. It's all right, but just, let's tweak it, refine it each time. Maybe you don't need to do that grip up in your hip. Maybe your knee's moving a little bit each time you figure out how to do a little less in your knee. Okay, so you know how to do it. Now we just have to coordinate, right? Your joint has the movement, your muscles can do it. It's just a different coordination, and sometimes that's a little tricky. So feet stay on the floor. Take a moment and really feel. What toes do you feel? How does the outside edge feel? The heel, all that stuff on the inside. And then can you keep all that really in place? I like to go kind of slowly. Both knees go towards the left, but the feet stay flat. Pretty small movement. My hips don't move. My pelvis doesn't move. It's really just an ankle movement. Some movement at the hips, but I'm thinking about it down at my ankle, my foot. Bring them back to center, and then slowly figure out that movement to the other side. How does it feel like the other way? And then back to center. Play with that on your own. You might find one side's a little easier than the other, or has more movement than the other. That's pretty normal for people. Might feel like you're barely moving or not moving at all. It's all right. Just keep your image. Do what you can. Maybe pause at your end range. Take a couple breaths. Sometimes if you just stop for a moment and breathe a little bit, let your body organize, give it a minute, and then it might go a little farther. Sometimes that's helpful. And then bring your feet back to center. That's kind of cool, right? I mean, I like it. I like a lot of things. But an interesting movement around your shin and your ankle. And I have a feeling Scott might talk about this in some standing poses a little later and how that happens in some of the standing poses that we often do. So yeah, like just kind of getting a sense of the foot, the ankle, the shin, and how that's waking up. Now, let's go back to some of the stuff we've done before. We're going to go back to that forward back movement. We did this last week, the heel slides. So we start with a flexing of the foot, the ball of the foot lifts, and then a little bit of abdominal work, low belly especially, so my heel gets kind of light. It's not dropped into the floor. It's on the floor, but it's very light. It's just barely touching. And then with that kind of light floating feeling, extend the leg out. And then same thing, light floating feeling from the abdominals to glide the heel back in. I always imagine I'm in very, very shallow water, and then my foot is like pushing the water, but not like really dropped into the cement underneath, right? If I were in very shallow water, if I were in an enormous bathtub that only had half an inch of water in it, that little floating, skimming feeling along the mat, and alternating side to side. A lot of work in my lower abs to keep that very light feeling in the foot. Excuse me there. One more each side. And then relaxing everything to the floor again. Take a moment. Maybe your back tightened up a little. It's all right. Just take a moment to relax it now. If you finish and you feel that, just like, oh, okay, let me let that go then. We're going to roll on to one side and line yourself up a little more with the back of the mat here. So I'm going to put my feet on the back edge of the mat. I'm going to put my butt on the back edge of the mat and my torso on the back edge of the mat. Then my knees are forward, right? So that's different than if my feet were forward with my knees. I have that foot on the back angle of the knees there. And then my whole body along the back edge of the mat there. Kind of the same position I was just in. I'm just on my side now. And then in this position here, I want to feel knee over knee, right? Not knee back behind the other knee. That helps keep my hips lined up. So I end up with the hips, hip over hip there. Now we get into oblique muscles a little bit. So abdominal obliques are also part of the lateral line. They help support all this kind of abduction movement. Is your oblique muscles, your side body. So I think of that little bit of lift around my obliques, my waist, a little bit of drawing in at the ribs. Now I'm going to take a moment and think of relaxing down at my shins, my knees, my ankles, my feet, because they're gripping. I don't know why, they just are. So maybe you find that same thing. And then we're going to work a little bit. Maybe you've done clamshells before. We're going to do baby clamshells. We're going to do, I don't know what a baby clam is called. Maybe they're called a baby clam. Just a little bit up and down. And perhaps you notice where my hand is. It's the side of your glute muscles. Kind of that area. I'm going to think about muscles a little bit in that part of the body. Notice 2-3 inches up. Just feeling that there. Not letting the hip move. Keeping some sense of the obliques. And now maybe you notice, maybe your bottom leg is pushing into the mat. Mine is a little bit. It's not terrible, but I'm going to be a little cautious of that. Do I need to push that much? Could I do a little more in my abdominals? Just let the leg be grounded. One more of these. Okay, so hopefully we got some of these muscles, thinking about these muscles, feeling these muscles. I'm going to keep my thighs, my knees together, but my top leg is going to stretch out forward. So my top leg is in front of my knees. It's not back in line with my body. It's in that same line as the thigh there. I'm going to flex the foot slightly, do all the other things. Lift the leg up so it's in line with your hip. So if you were standing up, you'd be standing hip distance apart, right? You would bring it up a little. So that feeling right there. And then I can see my foot. I'm going to look at it and make sure it's not turned with the toes pointing up or with the toes pointing down. But if I had to fudge, I would send my toes down. That would be more helpful than the toes up for what we're going to do. But I'm going to see if I can keep it straight ahead. Already, I can feel these muscles working, right? I'm going to balance it with my low abdominals, with my obliques, with my belly, right? Whole thing. A little bit up, same thing we just did, basically, and back down to hip distance. Little bit up. The higher I try to go, the more likely I am to rotate. My toes end up pointing up, so I don't go super high. I want to keep this very lateral position. Plenty of work in this lateral position. A couple more. And then last one, take it up, hold it there. See if you can think about your obliques a little more like you were lifting your leg from your oblique, supporting from the underneath side. And then rest, bend your knees, relax everything. And then let's go to the other side. Okay, so my pelvis, my butt is on the back of the mat. My torso is going to be there too. And my feet are going to be there. So I line up my feet right along the back of the mat. Knees are forward, about a 90-degree angle. And I might need to relax my calves a little bit to get my knees in this position. Sometimes that tendency to have the feet forward is just like, it's kind of tense through some of these muscles. So it seems like it wouldn't be that hard, right? But find the position, let everything relax in it. A little bit of lift in the underneath waist. Knee over knee makes hip over hip. Ribs connected. Take a moment. Could you relax your calves, your shins, your feet, your ankles? You can put your hand right on that outer hip. Little movement. Clam is just like peeking out. Oh, just barely opening. Like little kitten eyes, just barely opening. They're so sleepy. Just the start of feeling some of those outer glute muscles, outer hip muscles. Shins stay relaxed, so nothing's tugging on my knee to do this. I'm really keeping it in the hip. And one more time. And then leave all that relaxed. So thighs stay where they are. Just take that top leg and extend it out. So my top foot is way in front of my back foot here. My knees are still touching. And then I lift up a little bit so that foot's in line with my hip. I'm going to take a look down at my foot, flex it softly, and try to keep it so the toes in the same direction as my hip bones, right? Not turning up towards the ceiling. Knees straight forward. A little bit of lift in the underneath obliques. Already, it's work, right? So a little bit up, working those outer glutes. And release. Obliques are helping, really on both sides. My underneath leg really wants to push and help, and so I'm just gonna moderate that a little bit. I can push a little, but not too much. I can take a little look down to my feet, make sure my toes didn't turn up. Maybe think of lifting the heel up first, if you tend to do that. And two more. And then we do that last one where we hold it. And then bring it back down and relax everything here. And bring yourself up to sitting. All right, so for a lot of people, that can be really intense. And if you're not using your lower abdominals and supporting with your lower abdominals and your obliques, it's even more intense. So if it's like so much like, oh my gosh, I really can't do this. This just can't be good. Sometimes it's that the abdominals aren't really supporting the movement. So make sure you have that sense of working together, right? We want those muscles to work, but we want them to be supported, or else they'll cramp and just be too much and you'll spend the rest of the day trying to do this, right? Okay, so let's go back to the straight ahead position, knees bent and feet flat again. We know, right? The knees open, the feet want to roll. The knees fall in, the feet want to roll. We're going to try to keep the feet really flat and the knees straight ahead. And then scoot your butt a little bit towards your heels, kind of a little too close. Makes it a little hard to sit up. That's okay because we're going to roll down. Leave your feet where they are. And then take your hands down by your side. So we're going to work with that same thing of working at the hip joint a little bit without rolling the feet. And this time we're going to do it in a bridge pose and just see what that's like. So I'll talk you through it, but we're going to play with that movement again. So your hands are by your side and your feet are nice and grounded, whole foot all the way around, pressing. You roll up, pelvis, lower back, and ribs, not the highest bridge, like medium high bridge, right? Now, maybe your knees are already starting to point out. A lot of people that happens already. So you might lower down a little bit. See if you can keep your knees straight ahead. Last week, we talked about hamstrings and opening the front of the hips. The more you do that, the more your knees can stay straight ahead. Can you feel the heels? Nice, easy ankles. Shins forward, all the stuff we've been working on. And then rolling back down. We didn't do anything with the knees. I just felt like that was a lot of stuff. So let's come down. Now you know where you're going to start, right? Going again. Now you've got the knees straight ahead, and you're just going to play a tiny bit with that little baby clamshell, letting things open a couple, like, inches, and then bring back together without rolling the feet. Just a little bit open. Again, just lower your hips down. They could be super low as you do this, if you feel it in your knees. And then roll back down. You could also just do this with your feet, with your pelvis on the floor. There's a lot to find with the legs opening out and in. Let's try one more time. Find your nice open front of the hip, knees forward, feet grounded, easy calves and ankles. And then just playing a little bit, let the knees open from your belly. Let them come back together. Keep your whole foot on the floor. Feel how there's an ankle movement. Barely moving to almost not moving. Open and close. And then rolling back down. And settling everything on the floor. You're going to take your right leg out straight. And your left knee bent. Okay, so I don't know about you, but I'm definitely starting to feel those muscles work. So now it's a little easier when I'm not doing an active exercise with those muscles to just be aware of them as stabilizers because I've felt them. They've turned on. So again, I'm going to think of that right foot, toes pointing straight up, heel pointing straight forward, nice open front of the hip. And then from there, just do a little of turning it out, turning it in. So you get a sense of what we're not doing. We're not going to turn it out and in. And then on the floor, do a little bit of sliding it open and sliding it in, right? That's the other thing we're not going to do, theoretically. We're going to notice, right? Then again, look back at that foot, straight in line with the hips, toes straight up, supporting from your belly. Left leg comes in, and paying attention to the right leg as you lift your head, as you press your left leg into your hands. Can you keep that right leg straight ahead forward? And coming back down. Halfway down or all the way down is up to you. Paying attention to the line of that right foot on the floor. We'll do 2 more of those. Inhale, exhale. And rolling back, inhale. And last one. As your head lifts and you push forward, just take a look at your leg. Take a look at your foot. See if it's starting to move around a little. As you're rolling down, take a look at that leg. And then finish all the way down on your back, bend both knees in. And take your left leg straight out. Let's do all those things. Sorry, your right leg straight out. No, your left leg straight out. I have a hard time mirroring sometimes. Your left leg straight out. And then trying all those things again. Feel what it's like for the toes to turn out. Feel what it's like for your toes to turn in. What happens up in your hip? What's that position? See if you can feel straight up to the ceiling. And then do a little check-in and see if you were right. Does that seem about right? Yeah, looks pretty good. My foot was a little twisted, so I'll fix that. And then that other movement, just kind of snow angel out, right? Glide the legs straight out like you were making a snow angel. Feel where that is. That's another way it might move. And then again, see if you can feel right in line with the hip. You can do a little check-in. How does it look compared to how it feels? Keeping the left leg in place, right leg comes in. Support from your belly. Maybe a little bit of that hamstring feeling like we talked about last week. Maybe some oblique. Bring the head up. Rolling up through. And then rolling back down. Two more. Inhale to start. Back down. Take a look at your foot. And last one. And inhale as you start. And then just take both legs down to the floor. Let everything relax, however it likes to relax for a moment. And then in any way you like, bring yourself up to sitting. And then let's come over up to standing. So as you come to a forward bend your knees as much as you need to so you have the ability to take a look at your feet in line with your hips and your toes straight forward, your knees straight forward. And let your spine relax, your chest relax. And again, see if you can feel the whole foot. Big toe side, pinky toe side, heel. Follow the foot. We're rolling up to standing. All right, I'm going to pass it off. No kittens today, so hopefully it was easier to pay attention to me.
As they say, the show must go on, so even without kittens. So let's pick up where you left off in standing. And for most of us, when the feet point forward, then pretty much by default, the knees point forward too. So let's take a few breaths here. Let the weight drop into your feet. And then just a very light awareness. As you bend your knees, check to see that your knees go forward, straight ahead. Then as you straighten your knees, same thing, your knees still continue to track forward. Now what happens for a lot of people, as the knees bend, the knees clunk together. So very light awareness to check in that where your feet point, is where your knees point. Couple more, just a little bit of a movement here. Where your feet point is where your knees point. All right, let's make this a little bit more interesting. Step your feet wide apart. And then right from your hip sockets, externally rotate. So what your hips do, your feet have to follow, don't they? So now your feet are a little bit pointed out. So then when you bend your knees, same thing. Where your feet point, where your knees point. And come on up. Now, a lot of us, we may have strength imbalances in our body, sometimes mobility imbalances. And so working a bit with the alignment can help support better alignment, more harmonious functioning of the body. But it can be sometimes kind of tense too. So a light awareness, but not too tight an awareness. Let's do a couple more here. Cognizant that your feet are turned out. So as your knees bend, they go out too. Let's do one more. And then turn both your feet back toward the front. Now let's expand upon this. Turn your left foot in, then your right foot out from your hip socket. So where your right foot points, as you bend your knee follows. This is standard every day. If you've done much yoga, this is probably a pretty familiar movement, generating external rotation from the hip socket, such that where your foot points is where your knee tracks. Let's do one more. As a friend of mine once said in regarding to managing two households, back to the front, he said, not rocket science. Let's turn the right foot in, left foot out. So where your foot points straight out, where your knee tracks. Now, it's not to suggest that this is completely trivial to do. Sometimes it takes a fair bit of focus because of some of those maybe strength or mobility restrictions. So a light, gentle cognizance of how your knee tracks. And we're going to get to the more interesting stuff here in a few moments. So as you continue bending, bring awareness to your back leg. Is your back foot turned in? Where is your knee pointing? 9 times out of 10, the back knee is pointing out toward the side. That's because of particular strength and mobility imbalance in the hip. Let's come on back up to standing. Turn both feet forward. And for most people, the default feet point forward, knees are pointing forward too. So now the left side here, rather than turning the foot in, lift your heel up. Once you've lifted that heel up, then take that heel out to the side a few inches and set it down. Do you feel how that turned the back leg in? Keep that back leg turning in as you turn the front leg open. So now in the back leg, where your foot points, where your knee faces, that requires internal rotation. Front leg turned out, where your foot points, where your knee faces, requires external rotation. So maintaining those two as you bend and straighten. I know in my own body that the bend and straighten here, keeping that alignment, is pretty ingrained. I don't have to think about it much. But keeping the back leg turning in so that the knee is aligned with the foot takes a little bit more of a watchful inner eye. So now next time that knee in the bent position, let's pause there. The back foot turns in to align the knee. From the hip socket, back leg turns in. And keeping that inner spiral of the back leg, tip your hips. Hand to knee, hand to hip. It's got kind of sunny here in Blue Mountains. So maintaining the inner spiral of the back leg. If we did nothing besides that, maybe you're already feeling how that helps release the iliopsoas muscle. Then to build upon that releasing, bring your left arm forward, sweep it through. And then take a little peek at the ceiling. Whole time back leg spirals inwardly. Then come on up and back to the front. Now I know for a lot of years in yoga there was instruction that the back leg should rotate open or outward, not really based on solid physiology. So both feet forward. Rather than turning in from the foot, lift your heel. Then take your heel a few inches laterally outward and notice how the back leg turns inwardly automatically. Maintain that inward spiral, open up the front hip, knee, foot. Two legs are doing opposite things. One is externally rotating, one is internally rotating. Maintaining those opposites as you bend and straighten, bend and straighten. A few more. Now sometimes when the back leg turns in, whole torso turns. So keeping your torso more or less facing forward as you internally spiral. The next time that knee in the bent position, pause there. Maintaining the inner spiral as you tip your hips. And this is a really effective way to release really deeply that iliopsoas muscle. Torso more or less facing forward. Back leg spiraling inward. And then reaching the back leg out of your belly to anchor your foot. Then bring right arm forward and through. And take a little peek at the ceiling. And come on up. Turn back to the front. And step your feet together. Let's make our way to the floor. Inhale, feel your back ribs. And with the exhale, as your lower ribs go down to the floor, take your arms up to help open your upper chest. Inhale, fold, roll your spine down. Exhale, gorilla. And then step back. Let's take a few breaths here. Let your head hang. And then come on up. So let's go on to our sides. Start on your left side. So keep in mind, I'm your image to you all. And so very similar to what you did before, except have your legs straight and your feet a little bit forward in front of you. So arm, shoulder, butt on the back edge of your mat. Feet more or less at the front edge of your mat. Then shoulder atop shoulder, hip atop hip. Float your upper leg up. Point that foot, plantar flexion. And then to help work your core, see if you can keep hip atop hip as you bring your foot forward, as you bring your foot back. Forward, back, forward. Feel how hips tend to tip back. Keep hip over hip and back. As you go back, feel how hip tends to pitch forward. Keep hip over hip. One more front and back. Then that upper leg, bend the knee, bring it in. Then if possible, reach your hand behind your ankle, behind your Achilles, to catch that lower leg. If that's not possible, then just place the foot wherever it goes. But if it is possible, catch hold of that foot. Then lower leg, plantar flex, point that foot. And then to work your inner thigh, inhale, lift your leg up. Exhale, lower it down. Up, down, a few more. So what we're doing is methodically working with the outside of the leg, outer leg, and then shifting to work with the inside of the leg. Remember the names for that? Abductors, outside of the leg, like you're being abducted by aliens. What we're doing here is working the adductors, insides of the legs. Bring the legs together, adding them up. One more, last one. Right. Then flip on over to the other side. In the side camera angle, it's kind of hard to tell, which side is which, but from the front angle, remember, a mirror image. So ideally, you're on your right side, I'm on my left side. Back side of your mat, arm, shoulders, butt. Front edge of your mat, your 2 feet. So once you can feel shoulder above shoulder, hip above hip, keep them nestling. Float your upper foot up. Plantar flex that foot. And here part of the challenge is to keep hip stacked above hip. Inhale, leg forward. Exhale, leg back. This is a great way to access the outside of your leg. Work your abductors. Keeping hip over hip. Let's do one more front and back. All right, then bring that leg in. Foot on the floor, maybe close enough that you can catch hold of that ankle. And then to work on your adductors in your lower leg, point the foot. Keep a sense of length in that lower leg. Inhale, lift it. Exhale, lower it. Up and down, just like that. So sometimes this work reminds me that old band, remember the Tubes? Remember the name of one of their albums? Inside, outside. So we're working inside, outside of the legs. Let's do one more. All right. Then from your side, come on back up to hands and knees. And then from hands and knees to yoga pose, head down dog. Now let your head hang so then you can take a peek. And for many people, if not most people, that by default, the feet, they point straight ahead. And so too do the knees. The knees point straight ahead. Let's take a few breaths here and let this feeling steep into your motor memory. Where your feet point, where your knees point. And exhale, step forward to gorilla. Inhale, fold. And then roll up, mobilize your spine. Vertebra by vertebra. Arms up. Stand tall, arms down. So by default, probably more than likely where your feet point straight ahead is where your knees point straight ahead. So we're going to revisit something we worked on earlier. Step your feet apart. To maintain that alignment, take your left heel, lift it up. Take your left heel, kick it a few inches out toward the side. And more than likely, your back, knee, and foot, they're still lined up, aren't they? Now the front foot, turn it open. They're still lined up, aren't they? The back leg turns in, front leg turns out. Maintain that as you bend your front knee, keeping your torso more or less facing forward. Then keeping those opposite spirals as you tip your hips. And typically we either bring hand to knee or elbow to knee. Today, let's bring hand to shin. And once you catch hold of your shin, back leg keeps spiraling inwardly. And then slowly, slowly straighten your front knee. So front leg keeps rolling outwardly, externally. Back leg keeps rotating internally. Once you straighten that knee, we'll pause here for a few breaths. Then come on up, back to the front. So both feet point forward, both knees point forward. Now on your right leg, lift your heel. Take that heel out to turn the whole complex in. Front leg, turn the whole complex out. Left thigh, external rotation. Right thigh, internal rotation. Maintain those opposites as you bend your left knee. Maintain those opposites as you tip your hips. Bypassing hand to knee. Bypassing elbow to knee. Getting off at the last stop, hand to shin. So keeping that back leg spiraling internally, slowly, slowly straighten your front knee. And a few breaths here. Now ride the next inhale up. Turn back to the front. And then step your feet together. Your arms hang. Pretty much most of us, the weight tends to default to the heels. Keep your heels down, not to say lift them up or, balance on your tippy toes. Shift the weight slightly to the front of your foot. Maybe 55% of the weight on the balls of your feet and your toes. 45% of the weight in your heels. Now, what a lot of people find is when they do that weight distribution, automatically they feel the belly engage. Then a slight lift of your lower belly to lift your chest up and your head up. And looking straight across the room. Let's take a few breaths here. Stand tall. So right now your feet are your roots. All right. Now pull up a chair. Or maybe you have a cushion you want to sit on. A lot of the same ideas hold true in sitting. So whether you're sitting at your desk or sitting at the dining room, so in the same way most of us rock back on our heels and that negatively impacts posture. Most of us tend to rock on the back of the sitting bones and that negatively impacts posture. So just like in standing, you brought the weight from the heels more toward the forefoot. Your sitting bones, bring the weight from the back of your sitting bones a little bit more forward toward the front of your sitting bone. And to feel how that rotates your pelvis. And that's the point. Most of us, the pelvis is tucked posteriorly because there's a really strong, powerful tuck the tail energy. So having worked the insides of the legs, outsides of the legs, now let's reap the benefits. Go from tuck the tail onto the middle or even slightly on the fronts of your sitting bones. And sit tall. Now imagine how good your neck would feel if the hours a day that you spend maybe at a computer, that you sat like this rather than slouching. It's possible. So going from the backs of your sitting bones to the mids or even slightly forward on your sitting bones, that's one aspect. But for a lot of you, that this would get very fatiguing very quickly. It's because your belly is not doing the share of the work and the hip flexors are overworking. So to help release that overwork of the hip flexors, stay centered on your sitting bones. And now let your left thigh drop to the floor. Just like that thigh bone itself, we're very heavy. Now keep that left thigh bone heavy. Now the same thing in the right thigh bone. Let that right thigh bone drop. So placing the weight on your sitting bones mindfully. That's related to relaxing your tailbone. And let your two thigh bones drop out of your jaw and down into the earth. And then a few deep breaths here. Now, it's not out of the realm of possibility that you could sit at your desk all day sitting upright like this. You have to develop a little more core strength. Almost all of us do. But it makes for really happy neck and shoulders. And you don't need an expensive chair to do so. In fact, in my office, I quite often sit on a stool that doesn't even have a chair back, applying exactly what we just did. To let the deep breathing fall away. Remember, deep breathing isn't something you want to do all day long. It'd actually be really stressful for your system. All right. Time flies. So any comments, any questions, any of that stuff we did today? Really fun to be back with you all. Last week it was whole and none. Good to be back to half and half. Ah, yes. So I'm being reminded by the technical crew, Collette, that to help celebrate the year-end holidays, the winter holidays, we're going to take a little time off. And so for the last 2 weeks of December coming right up, we'll not be producing live classes, but we will have our library open for you to continue doing this great work. And we'll continue doing this work on our own, and we'll look forward to meeting up again after the new year. We will be here next week. I've been informed. So note to self. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.